Hopefully you know by now that in Modo we can use this fancy thing called dynamics to simulate physics, and we could drop a ball on a cube and the ball would bounce off the cube. But what if you wanted to drop, I don't know, a couple 100,000 balls onto a couple 100,000 cubes? Could you do that? Well, that's actually computationally difficult, you might say, but we can do it in Modo using something called replicators and replicator dynamics. So if I'm going to actually move pan back here in this fancy image, and you see that what we've created here, we've got this giant wall of replicator cubes and a whole bunch. I've got 3 different locators just pouring spheres down onto this stuff, and it's all bouncing all over the place and just bouncing off the cubes. Very cool and incredibly simple. So let's talk about how to do a little something like this. This should be fun, folks. Okay. So number 1, first of all, let's create a new document. That's always the first thing. We'll go to our setup tab, and we need to start out by creating some kind of geometry to work from. So I'm going to grab my model tools here and just drop a cube out in space. That'll be one of our cubes, and I'm going to drop a sphere out in space too. Now we've got a cube and a sphere. What about that? Now I'll grab my default mesh item, just that empty mesh item, and I'm going to grab the cube tool here and just drag out a great big rectangle to start with, and hit escape to drop that tool. We'll go to poly selection mode and select that poly. And I'm going to hit Shift D on the keyboard. Shift D is faceted subdivide, which actually is in, I believe, mesh edit. Anyway, click OK. We'll get 4 of these guys. And I'm going to select these middle things and move it on out, right? A little bit like that. Takes these top 2 edges in edge selection mode, move those on back. Let's move these middle ones back a little bit too. Doesn't really matter. I'm just kind of eyeballing this. Fake it, baby. Faking it back. All right. And then move that down. Alrighty. And then I'd like a whole bunch more vertices on this. Let's hit D to subdivide it, and D to subdivide it, and D to subdivide it. So we got a bunch of these things, and I'll just scale that up a little bit. I don't know, something like that. We're going to eyeball this. Looks good. Now we want to create, first of all, a couple of different replicators. So let's head up to our add item. In the items list, we'll go to particles and replicator. The prototype for that replicator will be our cube, and the point source will be our mesh, so that we've got cubes on all those little meshy points. But the cubes are not lined up straight. I'd kind of like them to be. So let's head to our source mode and set that to point data. Since all our points are parallel to our universe, then that's going to make all our cubes parallel to the universe, which looks pretty great. Also, it looks like we want a few more of these here. So let's go back and select that item. Poly selection mode, D for subdivide. Now we've got a lot more of them. That looks much better. Then I could probably scale this inward a little bit to bring these closer together. There we go. Nice. Now, if I hide the mesh that is serving as kind of our scaffolding there, then we have a whole lot of replicators right on top of each other, right? And if I head over to my render tab, of course, we will be able to see said replicators in the render. In general, you don't show your replicators in the viewport because that's kind of one of the whole reasons for replicators, because they kind of speed things up. But we do want to see it in our render. So there it is. And now we want to watch a bunch of spheres bounce off of this, right? Lots and lots of spheres, like water off a duck's back, something like that. So to do that, let's actually, we can close this up. We don't need to model anymore. And head over to our Particles tab in the Setup tab here, and head up to Radial Emitter. We'll take our radial emitter, everybody's favorite particle generator type, and move it up on top of our assembly here. And just move it over a little bit, something like that. That looks good. Then to run this simulation, I'm just going to click the little Run button down there, and we can watch our particles coming out of there very, very slowly. But that's fine. Let's just turn that up, though. I want like 500. Let's just do a rate of 500. Lots and lots of little spheres are going to come out of this thing. And now that we have some particle action going on, we can head over to Add Item again. Particles, Replicator one more time. And this time our prototype is the sphere. And our point source is our fancy new particle simulation. And now we have lots of little sphere replicators coming out of there. Lots and lots and lots of little spheres. Excellent. And finally, we want to add some dynamics to both of these things. So we want for our cubes to stay put, right? So let's grab the cube replicator item here. We'll head over to our dynamics sub-tab, and we'll click on static rigid body. Now those guys are going to be dynamic. They're going to sit still. Now we'll select the other replicator representing our spheres, and we're going to make those dynamic rigid or active rigid bodies. We're going to have to turn off our simulation first. So let's select that replicator, active rigid bodies, and now we can run our simulation, and our little active rigid bodies are going everywhere. And that's because they're actually colliding with each other the moment they're spawned, right? Because they're spawning from a single point, and they don't have time to move anywhere before they actually kind of explode away from each other, like electrons or something. I don't know. They're going everywhere. So to fix that, what we need to do is head over here to our dynamic replicator properties, and let's head down to our time until collision property and set that to something higher. Like I'm going to set that to 20, so they don't collide until after they're further away from the point, which should make it a little bit less messy, just slightly less messy. And then this is creating a lot of spheres. All right, I'm going to turn that off. That's a lot of spheres. Well, let's see what happens. I'm going to go to my cache. Let's just cache this from 0 to 120. Now we can just scroll through the simulation and see exactly what happens. There goes all those particles. There's so many. There's so many. And none of them are making it behind that shield, right? They're all getting deflected by the shield of cubes, which is just crazy. That's a lot. Okay, let's go to our render tab here and take a look at what we've done. That looks pretty cool. Now, just for fun, to make this look extra crazy cool, I'm going to move my camera here. Let's select the camera item and change the focal length down to like 20 millimeters. Very, very wide angle lens. Just going to make it look more dramatic. Something like that. And then, of course, we're going to want to see some motion blur on this stuff, right? So let's go to our options for the preview and turn on motion blur. Make sure that's enabled. Then in our camera, under camera effects, I can enable motion blur as well. And there we go. We've got motion blur on this thing, and that's looking pretty sweet. We can assign some materials, and you can imagine that this would get really fun really quickly. All right, so that's it, folks. That, folks, is a dynamic replicator frenzy. Have fun. We'll see you.